here with Velton from Velton's Coffee Roasting. How's it going today, sir?
It's good, yeah. Great.
Good, awesome. So you were kind enough to sit down with us and go through a few questions about your process and about Velton's, which we're very excited about. So the first question I have is, what led you to get into roasting in the first place?
Okay, so I've been in coffee quite a while. I'd been a barista for 10, 11 years or so. And then where I was working at the time, I was managing Bauhaus Books and Coffee down on Capitol Hill in Seattle. And they had opened Top Pot. And then when they opened the second Top Pot, they decided to get into roasting. They had enough of their own accounts at that point. And I had told them a few years prior that if they ever did get into roasting, that was the next step I wanted to take in coffee, and I was very curious about it. And to their credit, when they opened the second Top Pot and put the roastery in, they made me the head roaster, and I didn't know what I was doing for a while, but we figured it out. So yeah, and that was in around 2001, I believe.
Awesome, awesome. That's a common theme that I've heard is, I know people that I work with and friends who do amateur roasting, everyone like wants to get into roasting, and nobody really knows what they're doing when they first get into roasting because it's a complicated thing.
It's complicated, and one roastery can supply a lot of coffee shops.
Right.
So there's just not as many positions in roasteries as there are in cafes.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in terms of how you run Velton's, what do you look for when you're purchasing green coffee?
Well, we've got a few blends. We have to make sure we can maintain those. So there's that. And then we always have about 8 different single origin offerings at a time.
Sure.
And we try to keep a pretty well-rounded lineup of those. Some that are a little more approachable for folks, some that we know or feel will work well as espresso, some that maybe are a little more wild, might still work for espresso, but probably not for everyone. Yeah, and so when we're running low on a few of those, I'm trying to replace them with something similar.
Gotcha, that makes sense.
Yeah, and always, coffee, of course, agricultural, so there's different harvest seasons around the globe, so we're always trying to buy what's in season as much as possible.
Cool.
Yeah.
So I guess kind of on that note, we were talking about a little bit about this earlier too, but so for you, having some variety is maybe more important than specializing in one very specific
Roast
kind
type
of roast level or origin.
Yeah, no, definitely. I'm trying to have a little something for everyone. We always want to have a couple that are a little more wild, maybe bright, but we also want to make sure that we have some very approachable, just nice filter cups of coffee. Something that there's a lot of coffees that taste great on a cupping table, but maybe you don't want to drink a full pot of it.
Sure, yeah.
So we want to make sure we have some of those for those that's what they're looking for.
Right.
Yeah, a variety is definitely the goal.
Awesome. Yeah. Do you have yourself, regardless of whether you're selecting coffee to roast, a process that you find, washed or natural or honeyed that you find that you enjoy the most?
I would say it's probably washed.
Sure.
That's generally going to be my favorite, but there are exceptions to that. I definitely really enjoy naturals, and I think natural processing has gotten so much better to where I like naturals a lot as espresso.
Sure. Okay.
And as filter, I don't mind like 4 or 6 ounces. It's rare that I'm going to sit down and drink 2 or 3 cups in a row of a natural, probably.
Gotcha.
But again, there have been exceptions. There have been some outstanding ones that have come along.
We kind of talk about a lot the notion, and this was true, when I started getting deeper into specialty coffee. We talk about how the first time you have natural, you're like, how does anyone drink anything other than this? This is incredible. This is amazing. And then you drink 100 naturals and you go, wow, that wash was really good though.
Right.
Maybe I do like the balance, and I do like that it's a little bit easier to drink multiple cups or whatever. And then eventually you hit a point where you're kind of like, you know what, they're both great, different times.
I feel like that's where I'm at.
Yeah.
I like them all.
Yeah.
As long as they do it well, and the green was great to begin with. Yeah.
Cool.
And fantastic.
Do you have any tips for ways in which you sort of help to develop your palate that's a question we get a lot is, how do I taste all of these different notes that you say is in this stuff?
I think just being conscious while you're tasting the coffee, and even if you like cream and sugar, get in the habit of taking at least a few sips while it's black.
Okay.
Letting it cool a little bit, you'll start to get more of the flavors as it cools. I think if you're conscious about it while you're drinking the coffee and what you're tasting, and it's fine to cheat and look at the bag and see what they're telling you should taste, and see if you can find those things. And then you just slowly build a vocabulary in your head that your palate starts to tie into all these other tastes. Yeah.
Cool. Do you have a favorite kind of coffee or I should say, brew method for coffee? Espresso, pour over?
I would say my very favorite is pour over.
Okay.
And I just feel like I get the best, the clearest description of that coffee that way. But I totally love espresso.
Cool.
So my go-to is pour over when I really want to learn about a coffee.
Yeah.
But I do love to see what it will do as espresso as well. And
Cool.
yeah, it's hard for me to find an espresso I don't like.
Yeah, that's generally how we approach coffee, the same way in-house for us too, and how we kind of recommend it to people if there's a really complex roast, we always recommend it as a pour over because it's the only way you're really going to get everything out of it.
Yeah,
So,
and usually the flavor descriptors are designed for that.
Exactly.
More so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have any tips for anybody who maybe is a amateur roaster at home and trying to turn it into a business?
Definitely just keep tasting your roasts
Yeah.
all the time and try to trust your palate. Like if it's your roastery, it needs to be, there's so many different ways you can roast a coffee and have it turn out well. But make sure you like what you're doing and you're not trying to roast just for your customers.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right, that makes sense. This is one of my favorite questions that I don't even know how valuable of a question it is, but it's really interesting to me, so I always ask it.
Okay.
But do you find that your environment has kind of shaped any part of the way that you roast, or do you think that as a roasting culture develops, it tends to sort of guide the culture in coffee shops in an area? Like,
a little bit of both.
Sure.
I think they feed off each other.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not really sure.
It's a tough question to answer. We've talked about it with folks in the past, and like I notice, I'm from the Midwest. I'm from Detroit. The culture in roasters and coffee shops there is vastly different than what we find in the Pacific Northwest.
Right.
And while I haven't spent a lot of time in coffee shops on the East Coast, I know that in New York it's a very different vibe with the roasters and and I wonder how much local culture is influencing that, or if when you get into the specific parts of coffee culture, if there's some influence from roasters touching
I
local
think
coffee shops.
the Seattle area and the Pacific Northwest, I mean, we've had a pretty ingrained coffee culture,
Sure.
maybe to a degree longer or greater than most elsewhere.
Sure.
But it was, more dark roast oriented for a long time, and that's a lot of the roasters that popped up over time kind of modeled themselves that way, and it's taken us maybe a little longer, but I don't feel it's that way anymore. That
Sure.
we have enough of a kind of third wave type coffee culture here in Seattle that the roasteries that are popping up now don't necessarily feel like they gotta feed into the dark roast culture if they don't want to.
Sure.
So it's changing. It took us a little longer maybe to change here than elsewhere.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. This is probably a question that kind of ties in with what you were saying about offering a little bit for everybody. So
Yeah.
this may not be a different enough question, but do you ever find yourself chasing something with your roast, or do you generally let the coffee kind of speak for itself and let it inform the way that you're roasting?
Again, both.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's a kind of a two-way street.
Sure.
Where I have ideas up front what I think this coffee will taste like, and so I roast based on that, and then I'll taste it and maybe take it in a different direction based on what I'm tasting.
Sure. Okay.
But yeah, I definitely influence the coffee based on my expectations, but then the taste will influence how I roast it right
Cool.
back. So they work together.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. I guess kind of my last question, and this is a really hard question to answer, but do you have a favorite roast that you've done before?
Favorite roast. No.
No? Okay, that's fair.
Yeah, there's been some coffee. Every year there's a couple of coffees that stand out to me.
Sure.
And sometimes there were ones that I didn't expect them to be. More often than not, if we buy a $30 a pound geisha, and if we do, we don't buy much of it. It's hard to move those, but
Sure.
occasionally we've done that. Quite often that's one of the best coffees we did have that year.
Cool.
But then other times you'll get we've had a $3 a pound Peru that just blew everybody's doors off a year ago, and it wasn't anything crazy. It was just so well balanced and just had a little bit of everything going on. So yeah, every year there's a couple that stand out, but I wouldn't say there's one over the last 10 or so that's the one.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. That's a great answer.
All right.
I appreciate your time, sir.
Hey,
it's been a pleasure.
Cool.